The African sun burned high in the sky, casting golden light over the vast savanna. A group of tourists sat in an open-roof safari jeep, their cameras clicking and their voices murmuring with excitement. They had already seen a herd of elephants drinking at a watering hole, a tower of giraffes munching on acacia leaves, and even a few zebras galloping across the plains. But now their guide had brought them to a special sight, one that had them both fascinated and amused. Lying in the tall grass a few meters away was a massive male lion. His golden mane shimmered under the sun, his powerful limbs stretched out in complete relaxation. He looked utterly at peace, breathing slowly, his tail flicking lazily from time to time. The tourists were in awe of his size, his sheer majesty. But then, one of them, an American man in his late 30s wearing sunglasses and a safari hat, let out a chuckle. "Look at this lazy guy. Some king of the jungle he is, huh?" His wife, a blonde woman with an expensive camera around her neck, laughed too. "Yeah, I thought lions were supposed to be fierce. This one's just taking a nap like my cat at home." Others in the group started giggling, snapping more photos. One of them, a young man in a baseball cap, pulled out his phone and started recording. "Guys, check this out. World's laziest lion," he joked, zooming in on the sleeping predator. The guide, a tall African man named Joseph, frowned slightly. "He is resting," he said, his voice calm but firm. "Lions conserve their energy. He is not lazy, he is waiting." "Waiting for what?" the American man scoffed. "Dinner?" Joseph gave him a knowing smile but didn't answer. Instead, he kept his eyes on the lion, his grip tightening slightly on the steering wheel of the jeep. Encouraged by their laughter, another tourist, a woman with short brown hair, picked up a small pebble and tossed it toward the lion. It landed a few feet away from his head, barely making a sound. The lion didn't move. "Wow," she giggled. "Not even a flinch." The American man grinned and leaned forward. "Hey, let's see if we can wake him up." Joseph's head snapped toward him. "That is not a good idea." But the man ignored him. He cupped his hands around his mouth and let out a loud, exaggerated roar. For a second, nothing happened. The group waited, eyes darting between the man and the lion. The only sound was the distant cry of a bird somewhere in the trees. Then, with terrifying speed, the lion's golden eyes snapped open. The moment the lion's eyes opened, the laughter died instantly. A shiver of tension rippled through the air. The beast's amber gaze was sharp, piercing, and unmistakably aware. He was no longer just a sleeping animal, he was a predator, and he had just been disturbed. The American man, who had been grinning seconds ago, swallowed hard. His wife's hands tightened around her camera, but she didn't dare lift it. The young man with the phone lowered it slightly, unsure whether to keep recording or brace for whatever was coming next. The lion didn't move right away. He simply lay there, staring at them, his massive body still but coiled like a spring. His tail flicked once, slow and deliberate. Joseph, the guide, remained motionless, his dark eyes fixed on the beast. Maybe we should—" the brown-haired woman started, but she didn't finish her sentence. Without warning, the lion let out a deep, rumbling growl. It wasn't loud, but it vibrated through the ground, through the air, through their very bones. It was the kind of sound that made even the bravest understand they were nothing but prey in front of a king. The young man with the phone muttered, "Oh, shit." Slowly, the lion began to rise. His muscles shifted beneath his golden fur, powerful and terrifying. His mane, thick and wild, framed his face as he lifted his head, his ears flicking forward. When he stood at full height, he seemed even larger than before, his shoulders broad, his paws heavy against the earth. Joseph's voice was calm but urgent. "Stay still. No sudden movements." But panic was already setting in. The American man, who moments ago had been laughing, now reached for his wife's arm. We should get out of here." Joseph shook his head sharply. "Number, do not run." The lion took a slow step forward, just one. But it was enough to send a fresh wave of fear through the tourists. He was testing them, measuring their reaction. His massive head tilted slightly, his eyes locked onto the people in the jeep. Then, the worst possible thing happened. One of the tourists, an older man sitting near the back, let out a sharp gasp and scrambled backward in his seat. His foot slipped, and in his panic he knocked his water bottle off the edge of the jeep. It hit the ground with a dull thunk and rolled. The lion's ears flicked toward the sound. His head turned slightly, nostrils flaring. Joseph inhaled slowly. Nobody move, but fear had already gripped them. The brown-haired woman's hands were trembling. The young man with the phone was frozen, his screen still recording. The American man and his wife sat stiff as statues. And the lion. The lion took another step forward, and then another. The tension was suffocating. Then, in the silence, the American man made a terrible mistake. He reached out, perhaps to grab his wife, perhaps just out of nervous habit, but his sudden motion was enough. The lion's body tensed, then he lunged. The lion's lunge was like a bolt of lightning, fast, raw, and unstoppable. One moment, he was several feet away. The next, his massive form was crashing toward them, a blur of golden fur and muscle. Screams erupted inside the jeep. The American man yanked his wife toward him, shielding her as he ducked low. The brown-haired woman shrieked, her hands flying to her face. The young man with the phone, still gripping his device, cursed loudly as he scrambled backward. Joseph, the guide, reacted instantly. His hand shot to the ignition, twisting the key with practiced speed. The jeep roared to life just as the lion's powerful front paws landed on the hood with a heavy thud, shaking the entire vehicle. The beast's deep growl turned into a snarl, his lips curling back to reveal massive, yellowed fangs. His golden eyes burned with fury. Spittle flew from his mouth as he let out a thunderous roar, so loud and close that the air itself seemed to tremble. The older man at the back was sobbing now, his hands gripping the seat in front of him as if it could save him. The brown-haired woman was frozen, unable to move, her breath coming in shallow gasps. The young man with the phone, his fear momentarily overridden by adrenaline, was still recording. His camera caught every detail, the lion's rippling muscles, the flex of his claws as they dug into the metal hood, the sheer power radiating from the creature. "Drive! Drive!" the American man bellowed. "I know!" Joseph snapped, slamming his foot on the gas. The jeep jolted forward, its tires skidding against the dry earth. The lion, momentarily thrown off balance, let out a frustrated snarl as he stumbled backward, his claws raking against the hood. But his anger hadn't subsided. Instead of retreating, he circled them, his body low and tense, tail whipping back and forth. His movements were slow, deliberate. He wasn't just chasing them away, he was hunting. Joseph gritted his teeth, keeping one hand steady on the wheel, while the other reached for the rifle strapped to the side of his seat. He didn't want to use it. He never wanted to use it. But if it came down to life or death, he would have no choice. The jeep bumped over uneven ground, speeding toward a nearby dirt road, but the lion wasn't giving up. He charged again, his muscles propelling him forward with terrifying speed. The young man turned his camera toward the approaching beast, his voice shaking. "He's still coming! Oh my God, he's still coming!" Joseph's eyes flicked to the rearview mirror. The lion was gaining on them. "Hold on," he barked. He jerked the wheel to the left, sending the jeep into a sudden, sharp turn. The vehicle swerved, kicking up dust and gravel as it veered off the path. The lion lunged again, his claws slashing the air just inches from the back of the jeep. Screams filled the air. The chase wasn't over, it was just beginning. The jeep rattled violently as Joseph pushed the accelerator to its limit. Dust billowed in thick clouds behind them, but the lion was relentless. He sprinted effortlessly alongside the vehicle, his powerful legs eating up the distance with terrifying ease. His golden mane whipped in the wind, his snarls blending with the roaring engine. The tourists clung to their seats, white-knuckled and wide-eyed. The American man had his arms wrapped tightly around his wife. Both of them ducked low. The older man was muttering prayers under his breath. The brown-haired woman just kept shaking her head, eyes locked on the massive beast chasing them. The young man with the phone was still recording, his voice panicked. "This is insane! He's still coming! He's not stopping!" Joseph gritted his teeth. The lion wasn't just defending his territory anymore, he was in full predator mode, and the Jeep had become his prey. Up ahead, Joseph spotted a rocky incline. It was steep and uneven, but if he could maneuver the Jeep up it, the lion might lose momentum. "Hold on tight," he shouted. He jerked the wheel sharply, sending the vehicle veering toward the incline. The tires screeched against the dry earth as they struggled for grip, the sudden shift jostling the passengers. The lion reacted instantly. Instead of backing off, he changed course, cutting across the terrain with the precision of a trained killer. He was adapting, calculating. Just as the Jeep reached the slope, the lion lunged again. His massive paws struck the side of the vehicle, claws scraping against metal. The force of the impact sent the Jeep tilting dangerously, nearly tipping over. Screams erupted as the tourists braced themselves. The lion, thrown slightly off balance, landed hard on the ground but recovered instantly. His tail flicked, his eyes never leaving his target. Joseph fought to steady the wheel, his knuckles white. "We need to get out of his territory. If we can just—" The lion lunged again. This time he caught hold of the back of the Jeep. His claws sank into the spare tire mounted on the rear, his powerful jaws snapping inches away from the young man with the phone. The young man screamed, dropping his device as he scrambled toward the front. Joseph knew they were seconds from disaster. He needed something to break the lion's pursuit. Then he saw it. A fallen acacia tree just ahead, its thick branches stretching across the ground like skeletal arms. "Everyone, hold on!" He yanked the wheel hard to the right at the last second, swerving around the tree. The Jeep barely squeezed past, its tires skimming over the gnarled roots. The lion, too focused on his chase, didn't have time to react. His massive body collided with the fallen trunk. A deafening thud echoed through the air. The beast let out a furious snarl as his legs tangled in the branches, breaking his momentum. Joseph seized the moment. He floored the gas, sending the Jeep rocketing forward, putting as much distance as possible between them and the stunned predator. For the first time since the nightmare began, the lion did not immediately pursue. He stood there, panting, his amber eyes burning with fury as he watched the vehicle disappear into the dust. Silence filled the Jeep, except for the sound of heavy breathing and pounding hearts. Joseph exhaled slowly. "We're not safe yet," he said, "but I think we've got a chance." Nobody spoke. The tourists just stared at each other, their faces pale, their bodies trembling. The laughter from earlier seemed like a lifetime ago. The Jeep sped across the rough terrain, bouncing over uneven ground as Joseph pushed it to its limits. The dust in their wake was thick, swirling like a storm behind them, but no one dared look back. The tension in the air was suffocating, silent, heavy, and clinging to them like a second skin. The American man was still clutching his wife, his breath ragged. The young man with the phone, his hands shaking, fumbled to retrieve his device from the floor of the Jeep. The brown-haired woman sat motionless, her wide eyes locked on the horizon as if afraid to blink. Joseph kept his hand steady on the wheel, his expression unreadable. "We need to get to the main road," he said, his voice firm but calm. "If we make it there, we'll be out of his range." The American man finally found his voice. "And if we don't?" Joseph didn't answer. He didn't need to. The lion's raw power had already spoken for him. For a moment it seemed like they might have escaped. The jeep rattled forward, covering more ground, the acacia trees thinning as they neared a clearing. Then the young man gasped, "Oh, oh no." Joseph's stomach dropped. He didn't want to look. He already knew, but he did. In the rearview mirror, a golden blur emerged from the dust cloud. The lion was running again. Not as fast as before, but still closing the distance. His powerful muscles rippled with each stride, his ears flattened, his tail lashing in fury. His pride had been challenged. He had been mocked, disturbed from his rest, and nearly outmaneuvered. Now he wanted revenge. A fresh wave of panic spread through the jeep. "He's still coming," the American man choked out. Joseph cursed under his breath. He had never seen a lion this persistent. Most would have given up after being outrun, especially after hitting an obstacle. But this one was different. The brown-haired woman clutched her seat. "We can't outrun him, can we?" Joseph didn't lie. Not for long. The lion was gaining again, his eyes locked onto them with a hunter's precision. And then, just as Joseph was about to make a desperate turn, something unexpected happened. A deep, guttural roar echoed through the savannah, louder than anything they had heard before. It wasn't coming from behind them, it was coming from ahead. Joseph's heart skipped a beat. He knew that sound, another lion, and not just any lion. As they sped forward, the shape of another male lion came into view, a massive beast standing on a small rocky outcrop near the path. His mane was darker, his frame just as powerful, but his stance was one of dominance. He was not running. He was waiting. The pursuing lion slowed, his own growls turning into low, warning rumbles. The tourists held their breath. Joseph exhaled sharply. This might just save us. The jeep skidded to a shaky stop as Joseph quickly assessed the situation. The lion behind them had slowed. His powerful frame tensed with hesitation. His amber eyes flicked between the vehicle and the lion up ahead, the newcomer who stood like a guardian on the rocky outcrop. The tourists were dead silent, barely breathing. The American man's grip on his wife was iron tight. The young man with the phone had finally stopped recording, his fingers frozen on the screen. The brown-haired woman's lips were moving, though no sound came out, as if she was praying. Joseph, however, knew exactly what was happening. The lion that had been chasing them was strong, aggressive, and territorial. But the lion standing in front of them was older, more experienced, and carried himself with a dominance that only came with time. This was his land, his kingdom, and the younger lion had just crossed a dangerous line. A deep growl rumbled from the new lion's chest, a low vibration that made the very air around them tremble. His sharp eyes locked onto the approaching challenger, and in that moment, everything became clear. This wasn't about the humans anymore. This was a battle for dominance. The younger lion, the one who had terrorized the tourists, took a slow step forward. His tail flicked, his ears flattening slightly. He wasn't backing down, not yet. The older lion didn't move. He simply stood his ground, his body a coiled spring of muscle and raw power. Then, in an instant, he charged. The impact was thunderous. The two lions collided in an explosion of fury, teeth flashing, claws slashing, powerful bodies twisting and slamming against the earth. Dust erupted around them as they roared and grappled, each trying to overpower the other. The sheer force of their fight sent vibrations through the ground. The tourists could only watch, transfixed. The young man whispered, "Oh my God!" Joseph seized the moment. "This is our chance." He slammed the jeep into gear and gunned the engine, speeding away from the battle as fast as the uneven terrain would allow. The vehicle bounced violently, but no one complained. No one dared look back. They didn't stop until they reached the main dirt road where the terrain was smoother, safer. Only then did Joseph slow the jeep, letting the adrenaline settle. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Then, the American man let out a shaky breath. That was insane. His wife wiped at her face, which was pale and damp with sweat. The brown-haired woman was still shaking. The young man looked at his phone, the screen still showing the last thing he had recorded, the lion lunging onto the jeep. Joseph turned slightly, facing them with an expression that was both calm and firm. "You laughed at a sleeping lion." His voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of everything they had just survived. "Now, do you understand?" The tourists exchanged glances, their shame evident. They had come seeking adventure, thrills, and excitement, thinking themselves above nature, above the laws of the wild. But nature had just taught them a brutal lesson. A lion wasn't lazy. A lion wasn't a joke. A lion was king. And today they were lucky to have left his kingdom alive. And that, folks, is why you should never underestimate the wild. Nature isn't a zoo. It's raw, unpredictable, and ruled by the fiercest. What would you have done in this situation? Drop your thoughts in the comments. If you loved this thrill, smash that like button and subscribe for more jaw-dropping stories.